Okay, good morning, TEDx Portugal. My name is Peter Joseph, and welcome to an introduction to a resource-based economy. The goal of the following brief presentation is to outline the basic train of thought that arrives at this new economic model, which is based not on the movement of money as we know today, but rather the intelligent management of the Earth's resources, drawing inference from the physical world as to the most efficient, strategic, and sustainable method for meeting the needs of the human population. Today, we live in a world of growing unemployment, growing poverty, growing mental health disorders, drug abuse, resource depletion, overall environmental degradation, violence, war propensities, systemic global debt defaults, accelerating inflation, atmospheric destabilization, and many other social and ecological problems, too numerous, in fact, to name at this stage. And while these issues continue to persist to one degree or another, regardless of the political party in power or even the country, you might notice that there is a general dismissal by the public to consider that maybe the socioeconomic system itself, the very foundation of our society, could be intrinsically flawed and at fault. What if the very game we all play is really the problem? What if the very nature of the dominant institutions and methods of our time is actually creating and reinforcing certain behavioral tendencies which are, to put it simply, unsustainable and destructive? As time has moved forward with the exponential increase of human understanding, we have seen a natural erosion of various forms of superstitious and provably non-progressive practices. We appear to be slowly inching into an age of reason, if you will, which recognizes that there are indeed proven governing natural laws with direct physical reference, and that this method of thought, which we could term simply as scientific, allows us to extrapolate truly viable approaches to our conduct. And while we see the obvious fruits of this method of thought and its vast applications in our day-to-day lives, there is, however, one area which stands virtually untouched by the scientific methodology: our social system, of course. When it comes to the operation of society, we appear to be stuck in time, using antiquated, traditionalized practices which show clear signs of deficiency. In a world where one child unnecessarily dies every 5 seconds from poverty and deprivation, many look to government institutions for a resolution, failing to consider the reality that feeding and caring for the people of the world is not a political issue. It is a technical issue, resolvable by simple resource management and the intelligent and strategic application of technology. Similar to politics, we also have these things we call corporations, which are able to claim ownership of the precious, finite natural resources of this planet, many of which, of course, we all need to survive. And they utilize those resources for the betterment, really, of an isolated group through a self-interest-based system we, of course, call free market exchange. In fact, when it comes down to it, the message of this free market is quite clear. Either you submit to this game of differential advantage and self-interest, or you simply do not deserve the right to live. It appears you must earn your right to life on this planet, if you will, which, to a critical mind, reveals a clear bias to perpetuate one group or class over another. Yet this social offense really goes unchallenged in society, for it's structurally built in and elusive. And if we couple that issue with a monetary system based explicitly on debt, which, unannounced to most, mathematically guarantees that a subclass of the human population will always be deprived, we begin to see that we live in an advanced variation of feudalism and nothing more. For the record, please understand, it's technically impossible for everyone to have their needs met in the current system. The economic game simply isn't designed to allow everyone to live prosper. It is a win-lose system. regardless of the state of natural world and what we are able to produce and technically accomplish. So, brief points noted. I'd like to take a huge step back, putting aside everything we might have been taught about social constructs, and consider the following question. What are the immutable foundations of human health and prosperity, and construct a system which meets those needs for the entire human population, also understanding that we live, of course, on a finite planet, ensuring the sustainability of our habitat for future generations? To answer this question, we need to first consider the issue of human need or human necessity itself. Across the entire human species, there are basic, evolutionarily programmed needs which virtually all human beings share. If we do not get proper nutrition, food, air, and water, we'll cease to exist over time, obviously. If we're exposed to substances which are chemically toxic to our biology, we will likely get very sick. If we suffer a serious vitamin deficiency as a child, there is a predictable detrimental outcome for personal health, such as stunted growth or immunity problems. But as the human sciences have progressed, we find that human needs do not stop at this basic, commonly observed level. Humans have been found to be, in fact, biopsychosocial organisms, meaning we are intrinsically affected by our environment symbiotically in many subtle and complex ways. For instance, if a mother in the late stages of pregnancy suffers extreme emotional stress, flooding her system with cortisol, a stress hormone, the nervous system of that unborn child could be predictably compromised in a negative way for the rest of his or her life, and nothing can be done to cease that problem. This goes for infancy and early childhood as well. Critical developmental periods where the organism is literally being adapted to the perceived nature of the world they're entering. An impression which has been found to carry over for the entire life of that person in many ways as well. If that critical period is met with negative stress, suffering, and pain, it has been found, of course, that that child's development could evolve into predictable antisocial tendencies, including propensities for addictions and violence in later life. This is a very new science. The point here is that the physical, mental, and emotional health of a person can no longer be considered an isolated affair if our intent as a society is to produce psychologically and physically healthy human beings. The whole of society must be designed to meet our needs correctly. So, given this basic understanding, how would we go about logically designing a society that actually supports the human species outright, along with, of course, maintaining our environmental stability and sustainability? And this brings us to the concept of a resource-based economy. A resource-based economy is a direct response to these scientific understandings, inferentially derived to calculate how to best meet the spectrum of human needs in the most efficient and sustainable way possible. From there, we are able to arrange a society with very little need for human opinion. If, of course, our collective goal is to simply maximize our sustainability and economic efficiency, the system becomes self-evident, natural. So, there are three initial economic considerations I would like to run down: resource counting, dynamic equilibrium, and strategic design. As far as resource accounting, we recognize that we live in a virtually closed planetary biosphere with a set of mostly finite resources at our disposal. Given this reality, the logic becomes quite clear that we must account and organize scientifically. Proper economic resource allocation really cannot be made unless we have a clear understanding of what we have and where it is in a complete, unified, global way. Eventually, in fact, this understanding will also lead to what we could call the carrying capacity of the Earth, which is also very important information in general that I will not expand on right now. So, this accounting considered. The next step is to track our rates of change and regeneration. Here we have what could be called dynamic equilibrium. A classic example of this today is deforestation, a natural growth cycle, and if our use of wood exceeds the rate of natural regeneration, which is of course the case today, unfortunately, we have a problem, for it is, by definition, unsustainable, obviously. Remember, as an aside, the monetary market model requires as much consumption as possible to keep the growing population employed and hence the economy operational. This is, of course, simply ecocidal as an approach. A core requirement of a true economy is to economize or be strategically efficient and conservative. Today, in fact, by all measures, we live in an anti-economy, based erroneously on consumption, not conservation and sustainability. And this brings us now to strategic design. Efficiently meeting human needs on a finite planet in a sustainable way means resource allocation must be optimized strategically. Today, allocation is haphazardly done through arbitrary monetary rationalizations with no regard for the resources themselves and their properties. It is about what can be afforded by the producer and hence the consumer, not what is most efficiently, scientifically, and strategically applicable. Essentially, in a sustainable economy, production really needs to be based on scientific reasoning, and the attributes of the current model are just interferences. The market system has a cost efficiency-based mechanism which serves only to inhibit intelligent design. Let it be stated outright, for the record, that a true economy is about doing what is most scientifically accurate, not what some company can afford in order to remain competitive in the market system. That is complete negligence at the basic level. So, moving on, given these three basic economic components, let's now continue the inference. Building upon these, we can then arrive at the following more specific points. We need to move from a growth to a steady state economy. Dynamic equilibrium simply cannot be maintained in a growth economy, for constant growth is, well, impossible on a finite planet. 2, we need a collaborative system, not a competitive one. Again, strategic, true design simply cannot be fulfilled when cost efficiency is in play. 3, we need a true planned system. A system actually formulated to take into account resource allocation, dynamic equilibrium, and strategic design explicitly. The dispersed, haphazard corporate system doesn't even come close. And the lack of efficiency, waste, and imbalance is completely unacceptable. 4, automation is put before human labor in every level we can find. This falls under the component of strategic design once again. Not only do we design consumer goods to be as efficient as we can, but the design of the production methods themselves to produce these goods needs to be equally as strategic to optimize output and reduce waste. Believe it or not, productivity is now inverse to human employment in most sectors studied, which means it is in fact socially irresponsible not to automate. It can allow us to generate a strategic abundance, not to mention freeing humans from mundane, pointless, and dangerous labor. And 5, we need to move from a system based on property to one based on strategic access, and hence, in fact, the removal of monetary exchange completely. There is a big difference between the current state of affairs and the state of scarcity inherent in our past. We now have advanced production technology which can actually enable an access abundance, or a system of distribution which can allow for universal access to virtually all common goods and services when they need it, in fact, with no need for monetary exchange. In a society where I drive my car for only a few hours a week, does it really make efficient sense for me to store this vehicle where it sits for 90% of its lifespan? It is much more intelligent to create a universal shared system to eliminate such waste. So I'm going to have to move very quickly now due to time restrictions here, but I simply want to point out that we have a conspicuous consumption-based economy which is unsustainable, and we can create a much better system based on efficient strategic access if we are willing to put our mind to it. And this will conclude this presentation, and I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Peter.